Story 1. The Deal That Turned into Stalking. I needed to sell some old but high-quality power tools before an imminent move, so I listed them on Craigslist. A drill, driver, and a matching set, all for $80. It was a great deal, and responses were quick. One buyer tried to haggle down to $50, which I declined. The second reply, which came in just an hour later, immediately agreed to the $80 and wanted to pick them up that same evening. We settled at $5. I always conduct transactions in the driveway. It's just safer. But at 4:30, there was a knock. A man stood in the doorway, and his red car was already taking up part of my driveway. "I'm here for the tools," he said, admitting he was early. I asked him to wait in his car. "I'm not ready yet. Just give me a minute." He hesitated, and that awkward moment made me extremely uneasy. Finally, he turned around. I quickly gathered the tools and brought them out. He tested them using an outdoor outlet and seemed satisfied. Then, holding the drill, he suddenly blurted out, "How about $20? I was stunned, but politely explained that we had agreed on $80, and that was far too low. He silently put the drill down, turned away, and drove off. I felt played, but chalked it up to a minor inconvenience. A bit later, walking past the front window, I caught a glimpse of a familiar shape, that same red car parked just 3 houses down from mine. No one was inside. I convinced myself it was a coincidence and carried on with my evening. Another hour passed. I was cooking dinner when someone knocked on the door. My first thought was him, and I chose to ignore it, hoping whoever it was would leave. The knock repeated. "Hey, it's me. I decided. I'll take the tools. I brought the money," he yelled from the other side. I didn't believe him at all. The puzzle pieces instantly clicked. That car had been parked there for over an hour. He was stalking the house. I didn't respond. Instead, I called the police, giving them his name and car description. He called out several more times, then silence fell. I was standing by my couch, staring tensely at the front door. A minute passed, and I felt safe enough to approach the window. But just then, I heard something hit the side of the house with great force, followed by rustling leaves and running footsteps. I looked out the window and saw the guy limping, running toward his car. The police turned in at the perfect time, stopping him halfway. I was floored to hear what he admitted to. He had planned to rob me, but my refusal to let him into the house complicated things. The sound I heard? He had tried to climb a tree on the side of the house and jump onto the roof, but he missed, hitting the side and injuring his leg in the fall. The terrifying part? He was armed with a knife, and the roof he was aiming for was right under my unlocked second-story window. If he'd made the jump, he actually would have gotten inside. I stopped using Craigslist for such sales, and even to this day, every single window in my house, even the ones I think are out of reach, is dead-bolted shut.
Story 2. The Roommate Who Vanished into the Dark. Many years ago, I used Craigslist to find a room for rent to split costs. After about a week, I found a perfect place. Aaron, the owner and my soon-to-be roommate, seemed like a normal, nice guy, similar in age to me. Everything seemed perfect. With my few belongings packed, I drove 30 minutes out to the location. The house was in a woodsy terrain, removed from the main town, with a long, isolated driveway. When I pulled in, my heart sank. It was an old wooden home, easily 100 years old. However, the inside pictures on the ad had looked fairly modern, so I hoped for extensive renovations. Aaron greeted me, and inside I was relieved. The house was well maintained, clean, and clearly had been recently renovated. I happily moved my things in that night. The first few days went smoothly. Aaron worked in town most of the time, and since I worked from home, I often had the whole house to myself. Well, almost the whole house. There was one door that was always locked. I knew it wasn't my business, but it kept nagging at me. It almost certainly led to the basement, which was odd because he'd only mentioned a single-story home. A couple more days passed before the strangeness began. One night, Aaron went to bed early. I stayed up for a while and then did the same. Lying in bed, I had trouble falling asleep. After a while, I heard his bedroom door open. I listened. At first, silence. Then, after 2 or 3 minutes, slow footsteps began moving down the hall toward my door. They stopped. I heard the floorboards creak, followed by a soft thud, as if he was pressing up against my door. He stood there for a long time. Then he walked away, not back to his room, but the other way, toward the main hall. A door opened and closed. He wasn't sleeping in his room. Over the next few nights, the routine was the same. About 30 minutes after I went to bed, he'd leave his room, pause at my door, and then head toward and disappear behind that weird locked door. He was trying so hard to keep this a secret, and it was getting profoundly creepy. I decided I had to figure this out. I was starting to feel unsafe. I went to bed and waited for his routine. As soon as I heard him unlock and open the other door, I sprang up and quickly moved into the hallway. I caught him standing by the open doorway. He looked back at me, clearly startled. "Hey, is everything okay, Aaron?" I asked. He just stared, his eyes wide from the scare I'd given him. "Why do you keep going to that door every night?" I broke the silence, my patience gone. We stood across the long dark hallway, and I could sense that something was profoundly wrong with him. I took a step closer and spoke his name. "Aaron!" The moment I spoke it, he bolted, running around the corner and straight out the back door, disappearing into the dark woods. I was shaking, horrified by what had just happened, my mind racing with unknown fears. I shut the back door, grabbed a kitchen knife, and walked over to the door Aaron had left open. It was indeed a basement, but there was no light switch, and it clearly hadn't been renovated. The walls were made of old, decaying wood. I debated going down, torn between terror and morbid curiosity. The longer I stood there, the more afraid I became. I turned, ran back to my room, threw everything into 2 suitcases, stuffed them in my car, and drove away, never looking back. I never spoke to Aaron again. About 5 years later, I looked up the house online. It had been torn down years ago. I found an article from a few months after I left, stating the house was abandoned, meaning Aaron never returned, and was later demolished due to what they described as criminal findings. It gave no more detail. I was shaken for weeks. Whatever was happening with him and in that house, I escaped just in time.
Story 3. The TV that led to a violent encounter. 3 years ago, I signed a lease for a small house. Having lived in an apartment, I didn't have much furniture, especially a large TV for the living room. Low on cash, I turned to Craigslist to find one. I eventually found one that seemed perfect, cheap, large, and in working condition. It was an older, so-called flat screen, the kind that was still 3 or 4 inches thick and very heavy. I emailed the owner, Mitch, and continued my search. His response came the following morning. He introduced himself and said he'd love to show me the TV. His enthusiasm struck me as over the top, making me a little uncomfortable, but I figured he was just a happy old man. We agreed on 6:30 p.m. the next day. He sent his address and, oddly, a Google Calendar invite for an event labeled Craigslist TV. I accepted, though it was certainly not normal. The next day, after work, I arrived at his address just after dark. All the lights were on inside, and the front door was partially ajar. Thinking he left it open for me, I leaned over and rang the doorbell. The moment the bell rang, something heavy dropped on the far end of the house, and silence immediately followed. That sound instantly set off my alarm bells. I decided I had a bad feeling and was just going to leave. But then, footsteps came from behind the door, which opened slightly wider, revealing a man. "Need something?" he said, half his body still obscured. "Oh, yeah, I was here to look at your TV. We scheduled for 6:30. The man stared at me for a second. All right. He opened the door and let me inside. In that moment, I knew something was wrong. He was nothing like the friendly guy on the emails. He was a large, grumpy-looking, middle-aged dude. But I was already inside by the time my mind registered all the red flags. The TV was right by the door, so he stood there while I looked at it. Uh, yeah, this looks good. I'll take it, I said, not even caring if it worked, just wanting to leave quickly. I held out the cash. He looked at it for a moment, then back at me. He reached out, took the money, shoved it in his pocket, and without giving me any time to react, he grabbed me by the shoulder, shoved me back toward the door, and yelled at me to leave. I didn't argue. I sprinted out to my truck and drove away. Not long after, I pulled over and called the police, letting them know I'd been robbed. The whole time I was thinking how stupid he was robbing me at his own house and letting me go. But when the police arrived at the house and called me back, I was in complete shock. The man I met was not Mitch. The real Mitch, the homeowner, was found unconscious in the kitchen. Thankfully, he survived, though he had serious injuries. The man I met was another Craigslist customer who was there to pick up some kitchenware. He had jumped Mitch, robbing and beating him likely just minutes before I showed up. What's even crazier is that Mitch had sent that attacker a Google Calendar invite as well. The man accepted it, likely unaware that it exposed his email address, which just so happened to include his first and last name. He was caught within a few days. I actually got to meet the real Mitch during the case. He was, in fact, the happy old man I had imagined, despite his ordeal. But for me, the lesson was permanent. Even small things, like an uneasy feeling or an odd calendar invite, can be the sign of real immediate danger.